Every so often there comes a man who is able to see the universe in a totally new way, whose vision upsets the very foundations of the world as we know it. With his ideas still in ferment, Albert Einstein was 22 years old when he set out alone on foot across the Alps. In his youthful passage through the mountains, he longed to grasp the hidden design, the underlying principles of nature. Throughout his life, Einstein would look for this harmony, not only in his science, but in the world of men. The world wanted to know Albert Einstein, yet he remained a mystery to those who only saw his public face, and perhaps to himself as well. What does a fish know about the water in which he swims? He asked himself. But those who were close enough got a glimpse inside the man.
Is this white? Are you ready? Professor Freudis, CEC, here in Amerika bietet zu sein. Wenn ich Sie sehe, sicher.
He loved Jewish jokes. I have told him many, and I wish that I could just, the thing I wish most is that I would have a record in which I could capture Einstein's laughter when he heard a good Jewish joke. He would laugh, his laughter sounded something like the bark of a contented seal, you know. I mean, it was a very strange sound.
What do you think of prohibition, Professor?
Ich trinke nicht, also ist mir das ganz gleich. He doesn't drink at all, so he is not interested in this question.
It was like someone who looked for many, many, many dimensions, whether they'll be proven or not, and could see the whole. And that is why I think he loved puzzles so much. But the combination of that vast, somewhere inner detachment and the enormous ethical commitment was a very wonderful thing. It was totally integrated into one flesh and bones, and I think that's rare from my experience.
Although he knew who he was, although he was aware of his celebrity, he always took it with humor and always laughed at it and at himself.
When Einstein arrived in America in the early 1930s, he was already a mythic figure. But behind his public image was a man in exile. A loner pulled into the public eye. A pacifist who would be drawn into war. A scientist who believed in God. He simplified his life to focus on his work. Socks were unnecessary. A leather jacket would never need replacing. An egg could be boiled in soup water to save time cleaning a pot. Aside from his work, his pleasures were few. sailing, and his violin. He worked more like an artist than a scientist, arriving at a theory not so much by experimental deduction, but confidently by intuition.
The significance of Einstein's work is that it was really fundamental to an understanding of the nature of the universe, the nature of the world in which we live, and that it was characterized by an astonishing amount of originality. New ideas are what are important about Einstein's theories.
Not to be cowed by authority, not to be awed by what the ancestors said. It is, in other words, it is an attitude where you take a fresh look at any question that comes your way. And in that regard, Einstein was among the greatest men of science of all time, one may say, in finding where the question is.
When he was 15 years old, he had asked himself, what would the world look like if I were speeding along on a motorcycle at the speed of light? What would I see? Well, you see, he answered that question in his 1905 paper on special relativity. And presumably, from the time he was 15 until 25 or 26, 1905, he kept thinking about that question.
That same year, working at the patent office in Bern, Switzerland, he published 3 papers that changed man's conception of the universe. He questioned our basic notions of time and space that had lasted 300 years and gave the world a revolutionary new way of understanding it. His still unproven theory of relativity shocked the world with new images. A time traveler straddling a light beam, a falling elevator in outer space, a yardstick that would expand and contract depending on its velocity. It would be 15 years before science would be able to verify his audacious vision. He waited confidently, calling the effort to provide proof the detail work.
Einstein had the faith that relativity was right. Now, why do you have such a faith? Because it is simple, it is beautiful, and those are the criteria that were more important to him, as in fact to, I think, most scientists. More important than any other criteria one can think of.
I don't think that he was the first scientist to have had the feeling, the belief, that if you can set up a theory that is really beautiful in its simplicity and generality, then there is a good chance that this theory will turn out to be correct. This, I think, was a guiding principle for Einstein, that there is sense and beauty in the physical world.
One of his most important characteristics is that he was unafraid of time. You work on a movie, I work on a physics problem, and when you've been busy for a year and you have not gotten anywhere, you say, well, maybe that was not such a hard idea. Not Einstein. If he had an idea, that was the way he would be, that was the way he would follow, and he couldn't care how long it took.
Albert Einstein was born March 14th, 1879, in Ulm, a small town in southern Germany, to assimilated Jewish parents. Later, he and his sister Maya were raised in Munich. From a young age, Einstein was a rebellious and independent thinker. He instinctively hated the regimentation of the German school system, calling the schools barracks and the teachers lieutenants. At home, he was stimulated more by a free exchange of ideas. His independent readings were not only in science, including his holy geometry book, but philosophy as well. Before he was of conscription age, finding the military posturing of the Germans ridiculous, he obtained a paper for 3 marks that rescinded his German citizenship. At 17 years of age, he was stateless, a young man without a country. He completed his secondary education in Switzerland, where he met his first wife, fellow physics student Mileva Maric. They had 2 sons. Although their marriage would not survive, it was not due to the difference in their religions. For most of Einstein's life, he was a cultural rather than a practicing Jew.
When he was a boy of 6 or 7, there was one year that he was very religious. He followed all the Jewish rites and precepts. And as he told a friend, he would compose songs in honor of God, which he would sing to himself on his way to school. That vanished after about 1 year.
But what did continue in Einstein was a feeling for the ethical codes by which man should live, a striving for peaceful coexistence. He developed an indifference for material things, calling each possession a stone tied round his neck. He wrote, "The commonplace goals of human endeavor, possessions, outward success, and luxury have always seemed to me despicable." In science, he found an escape from what he considered the dreariness of daily existence and a connection with a larger universe.
Napoleon and other great men of his type, they were makers of empire. But there is an order of men who get beyond that. They are not makers of empire, but they are makers of universe. When they have made those universes, their hands are unstained by the blood of any human being on earth. Ptolemy made a universe which lasted 1,400 years. Newton also made a universe which has lasted 300 years. Einstein has made a universe, and I can't tell you how long that will last.
Einstein's universe truly began in 1919 when science finally caught up with his theories. Data taken during a solar eclipse measuring the displacement of a star confirmed his predictions of the bending of starlight and the gravitational field of the sun. Einstein's new universe made front-page news around the world, and he became an overnight celebrity. Two years later, while traveling to Japan, Einstein learned that he had been awarded the Nobel Prize in physics. Not for his now famous theory of relativity, but for other work in physics, especially his equation for the photoelectric effect. His theory of relativity was still controversial in the scientific community.
And here he comes, down from the sun tower after a hard morning.
Einstein's face was recognized now all over the world. Everything he did or said became front-page news.
It was very skillful. You had to build up the outside and then put in the inside and then more outside and inside. It was a great piece of engineering to put that up.
This 100-inch reflector was completed about...
Fame gave Einstein a new and powerful political platform. But his personal life had been in crisis. He had divorced Mileva after 5 years of separation and married his first cousin, Elsa, who had nursed Einstein back to health when he was ill in Berlin. Now she cared for Einstein as they traveled around the world. He used the occasions intended to honor him to voice his distrust of militarism, his desire for an international dialogue among scientists, and the need for an international organization of nations. During the First World War, while a professor in Berlin, Einstein had been shocked to find many of his fellow scientists supporting the war, equating German culture with German militarism.
The first time that Einstein made any political public statement was during the First World War, when a very small number of people made a proposal for all intellectuals in Europe to band together to help keep alive Europe's culture. In the course of time, he became what you may call a pacifist. For example, he was a great admirer of Gandhi's ideas of passive resistance. He was very much in favor of people not joining armies of whatever nation. The nature of his pacifism is perhaps best stated in the word supranationalism.
With Mahatma Gandhi, he signed a manifesto against obligatory military service, suggesting that if only 2% of the population of each country refused induction, there could be no armies. But in Germany, everything pointed to armies and war. With his strong belief in the supreme dignity and life of the individual, he was terrified by the mass psychology of fascism. There were threats on his life, which he didn't take too seriously, but he did take Nazism seriously. A group of anti-Semitic physicists dismissed the theory of relativity as an erroneous Jewish theory. 2,000 books were burned outside the Opera House in Berlin. Among the authors were Albert Einstein. He was no longer the illustrious German genius, but a communist, an anti-German, a Jew.
I've often asked myself the question, what do we mean when we say that Einstein was a Jew? But first of all, there is his own self-affirmation. He felt himself to be a Jew. He was attached to the prophetic element, I believe, in the Jewish legacy and tradition. He was a Jew in the sense that whatever happened to Jews happened to him. And this, of course, was dramatized by the fact that Nazi Germany couldn't possibly sustain him because he was a Jew. No matter how great was his eminence, he was the victim of the Jewish fate and of the Jewish affliction. And in a sense, his wandering in the later years of his life seemed to symbolize the condition of the Jewish people as a people which had much influence but no power to open a single door.
He never forgave the Germans for what they had done. Never. And there are several very moving short pieces written by him, such as one contribution dealing with the destruction of the ghetto in Warsaw. On the other hand, that was slightly the paradox, he was deeply rooted in the German culture. We always spoke German together, because that is the best way I could follow the nuance of his personality. German was the language in which he was free to modulate and to express himself.
In 1929, in Kaputh, outside of Berlin, Einstein and Elsa built a summer residence which he called his hut. Here he could retreat to nature, work undisturbed, and take his sailboat out on the lake. It was an idyllic place where he felt comfortable, where, Elsa wrote a friend, even the local Nazis loved Einstein. But only 3 summers passed before the Nazis came to power, and while Einstein and Elsa were out of the country, the Nazis raided their home and confiscated their property. The summer home was turned into an Aryan youth house. A year later, the local newspaper advertised his boat for sale. Einstein was never to return to Germany again.
Dr. Einstein, who gave the world its biggest headache, is back in California again with his wife. They've been fog-bound all night in San Pedro Harbor. The professor had a theory as to how they could land, but before he and the captain could figure it out, the fog had all gone away. Now he's going to the Institute of Technology in Pasadena to work with other distinguished scientists. There his theory will be thoroughly discussed and analyzed, and if it is what he says it is, why then everything will be all right, won't it? Of course, it might be possible that he's come here to find out what it's all about.
America held out the hope for freedom to Einstein and others escaping Hitler's persecution. On first impression, Einstein felt that Americans were optimistic and forward-looking, free from the rigidity of European society. While giving lectures across the country and considering a position at Caltech, Einstein discovered his first real taste of America. He wrote, "I've been staying for 2 months in this country of contradictions and surprises where one alternates between admiration and head-shaking." The Hopi Indians gave Einstein the name the Great Relative. He was wooed by Hollywood and befriended by Charlie Chaplin, and good-naturedly accepted the publicity and fanfare that would accompany his presence everywhere. Chaplin took Einstein to a premiere of his film City Lights. When the crowds surrounded their limousine, Einstein asked, "What does it mean?" Chaplin replied, "Nothing." Einstein's first trip to the United States 2 years earlier was prompted at the request of the Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann for the purpose of raising funds for the planned Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was sympathetic to preserving the Jewish culture and community and had made a special visit to Palestine in 1923. He was drawn to the spirit of the young Zionists, but never chose to live there. His path would lead to America.
The question why he chose America as his final destination may even have a rather prosaic answer. Where could he go to? It may be the circumstance that just at that time, a man in New Jersey called Bamberger established an institute for advanced studies in which the members would really have no duties incumbent upon them. I know because I've had that distinction. You don't have to do anything if you don't want to. You don't have to publish if you don't want to. You don't have to give lectures if you don't want to. You're entirely alone with the ability to think, to speculate, not to think, not to speculate. And I think this appealed to his libertarian feeling that he didn't want to be enclosed.
At the Institute, working with 2 assistants, Einstein continued his grand search for a single theory that would encompass all of nature. A grand scheme that would unify both the large forces of the planets and the small forces of the atom.
He worked very intensely with 1 or 2 or 3 people at most, and had very little contact on a day-to-day basis with the other younger members of the Institute.
He liked to talk about his work, his ideas, and see how another person would react. The general method, which we wanted to follow, usually was suggested by Einstein. The detailed procedures which we used, well, were sometimes proposed by Einstein and sometimes by Peter Bergman or myself. There were innumerable jokes and misunderstandings about Bergman and Bergman. But it is very important to stress that we worked not on a basis of master and disciples, but whatever we had to say would be taken very seriously and discussed just as thoroughly as if it was Einstein's idea. What he liked was a resonance.
Einstein had little contact with the younger physicists at the Institute who were caught up in the exciting new field of quantum mechanics. With quantum's main proponent, Niels Bohr, Einstein had a 20-year argument. He stubbornly held to his own beliefs.
He had a certain type of arrogance. He had a certain belief that, not that he said it in those words, but that is the way I read him personally, that he had a sort of special pipeline to God, you know. He would always say that God doesn't play dice, to which Niels Bohr would reply, well, how do you know what God's doing, you know? He had these images of, somewhere that his notion of simplicity was the one that was going to prevail.
And this, of course, explains his difficulty in accepting quantum mechanics with its uncertainty, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which introduces, Einstein thought, the idea that chance is involved in the physical world.
In fact, in his first part of his life, that when he did his real important work, his notions of simplicity were the guide to the 20th century insofar as science is concerned. Later on, I think he was just, you know, he was completely off base. I mean, if Einstein had stopped doing physics in the year 1925 and had gone fishing, he would be just as beloved, just as great, and it would not have made a damn bit of difference.
None of these criticisms fazed Einstein. He still played his violin, he still sailed, and stubbornly pursued his lofty vision. It was only news from Europe which would pull Einstein from his work. Requests from refugees for sponsorship to emigrate to America poured in. He wrote so many affidavits he began to fear they had lost their value. Elsa remarked that though her husband seemed invulnerable, he was actually much more vulnerable than any other man she knew.
We are concerned here with an act of humanity, with the maintaining of cultural values, and not least with a measure of considerable political importance. The effect upon all nations, and not least upon the Germans, of the fate of these innocent people, so maliciously persecuted, must not be underestimated. To leave these victims to their misery would be a heavy blow to all those who believe in human solidarity and would encourage those who believe only in force and oppression and who act accordingly.
When the Nazis came into power, Einstein, I think, was faced with a dilemma. Should he continue with his pacifism, or should he do what he could to resist the Nazis in their effort to get control of the whole world?
He said that he would be willing to subscribe to the idea to resist force with force. Because he said, otherwise it's like trying to cure a sick tribe of people. You try to cure them in a way that is too slow, that by the time you cure them by pacifist way, they're all dead. That's not very efficient.
Einstein wrote, a close friend, due to the wretched traditions of the Germans, who are such a badly messed up people, it will be very difficult to remedy the situation by sensible, not to speak of humane, means. I keep hoping that at the end of the war, with God's benevolent help, they will largely kill each other off. Many absolute pacifists felt betrayed by Einstein's militant pacifism. But Hitler forced his hand. In 1939, news came to Einstein that German physicists had succeeded in producing nuclear fission. The uranium atom could now be split. Germany might be able to develop a bomb.
We were very worried that the Germans will develop atomic weapons. We wanted, therefore, to interest the United States to develop nuclear weapons so that Hitler should not be the only one to possess them. And it was a friend of mine, Dr. Szilard, who had the idea that Einstein should write a letter to Roosevelt, and maybe that will have some effect. He did not know about the fission process, which was, of course, the basis of the difficulty. But he understood it in 15 minutes, and he dictated a letter. It was taken to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt appointed the Bureau of Standards.
By E. Fermi and L. Szilard leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate future. It is conceivable that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may thus be constructed. In view of this situation, you might think it desirable to put forward a recommendation for government action. The government gathered the top American and European exile scientists to work on the Manhattan Project, headed by Robert Oppenheimer. Science and government were at the beginning of a new and ambitious partnership. Einstein was not called to participate. He remained in Princeton. The work at Los Alamos was considered too confidential to be entrusted to Einstein. He was considered a security risk.
But we did not want it to be exploded over a Japanese city, but over open territory to show it to the Japanese scientists that there is such thing terrible, and Japan should come to a good peace with the United States. Well, we tried to persuade the people, the government, but we did not succeed.
On March 25th, 1945, Einstein sent a second letter to President Roosevelt, warning of the catastrophic consequences that would result if the atom bomb were ever actually used. FDR died a few days later. The letter lay unopened on his desk. August 6th, 1945, the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another bomb was dropped on Nagasaki.
Captain Behan, what was your most outstanding experience on this historic flight?
I suppose it was when the clouds opened up over the target at Nagasaki. The target was there pretty as a picture. I made the run, let the bomb go. That was my greatest thrill.
Einstein told a close friend when he heard the news, "I could burn my fingers that I wrote that first letter to Roosevelt." The ancient Chinese were right. It is impossible to know the results of your actions.
In this photograph, it's in front of 112 Mercer Street in Princeton, which was an old white house, which was just absolutely beautiful. It's a real, I don't know what's happened to it today. I hope that somebody would preserve that as a shrine. But although in his will it states that that shouldn't happen.
Well, houses have spirits. I mean, there was something about that house. That old American shingle house with the low, low ceilings and everything a little bit lopsided. And that old, great, big German furniture. And there was this simplicity, a stillness in that house, this sweetness. But it was created so much by the women of the house, to me.
Since Elsa's death in 1936, Einstein had been living with his stepdaughter, Margot, his secretary of 20 years, Helen Dukas, and his sister, Maya. After the war, Maya fell ill and was bedridden. Einstein read to her each night from their favorite writers, Tolstoy and Goethe.
There's a word in German which is Wirklichkeit. It's a combination of fact and truth. And that genuine feeling and that sweetness and that quiet, Wirklichkeit, was in that house. Wirklichkeit.
The media sensationalized Einstein's role in the building of the atom bomb. They called him the father of the bomb, but he was not. Although Einstein's theoretical formulation, E equals mc squared, was the basis for nuclear fission, it was only a description of nature, not a prescription for a bomb. Einstein did not feel guilty about his science, but he did feel guilty.
I didn't see much of Einstein until after the war. We usually talked about world affairs rather than about science. One evening, Einstein said, and I tried to fix this in my mind while he was saying it, and immediately afterward I left, and as soon as he had gone back in the house, I got out my diary and wrote down just what he had said. He said, I made one mistake in my life when I signed that letter to President Roosevelt advocating that the atomic bombs be built. But perhaps I can be forgiven for that because we all felt that there was a high probability that the Germans were working on this problem and they might succeed and use the atomic bomb to become the master race.
Einstein's link to the atom bomb brought an onslaught of letters and telegrams. Helen Dukas tried to protect him. He withdrew to Mercer Street. But the sweetness was not the same. Einstein's worst fears had been realized. The products of science were not benign. Man could now destroy the world. Einstein was burdened by the misuse of what he loved most, and believed that now a dramatic new way of thinking was needed. He felt a profound moral obligation to act.
In 1946, the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists was set up. This committee collected several $100,000 from donors. It produced a film about the atomic bomb and the nature of nuclear war, advocating what Einstein was advocating at that time, that the time had come to give up the idea of settling disputes between the major powers by resorting to war, that the weapons finally had become too destructive to make it rational to follow this old pattern of going to war. So the Emergency Committee was set up with Einstein as the chairman, and it was usually called just the Einstein Committee.
Einstein and other scientists wanted to moderate the partnership between science and government, feeling that it dangerously placed technology and its power in the wrong hands.
We scientists who released this immense power have overwhelming responsibility in this world life and death struggle to harness atom. We ask your help in this fateful moment.
That film might have had some pertinence if hydrogen bombs hadn't been developed in the period around 1950. Well, of course, the hydrogen bombs just emphasized the fact that nuclear war between the nuclear powers would just be pure insanity. The overkill capabilities are so great and cheap. The cheapest way to kill people is to use nuclear weapons. They're really remarkably cheap.
Stattdessen ist sie grenzenloser Plunder und macht den großen Ursprung keine Ehre. There is no honor to the origin, this great technology. Es muss der Besen wieder sein gewesen und wie der Geist die Technik überwinden. Spirit must again conquer technology, overcome technology. Am weisen Meister wird die Welt genesen. On the wise master, the world will recover. In this case, the master again, not God. In this case, the master not Newton, but the master Einstein. This is the light of hope we tend to ignite today with a match.
I don't know how much hope he had, but he felt at any rate obligated to make every possible effort on his part to bring the end of war about. I think like most people who have some idea of the destructiveness of nuclear weapons, he realized that a third world war might well mean the end of, or almost certainly mean the end of civilization on Earth and possibly the end of life on Earth.
What need is there for responsibility? I believe that the horrifying deterioration in the ethical conduct of people today stems from the mechanization and dehumanization of our lives, a disastrous byproduct of the development of the scientific and technical mentality. We are guilty. Man grows cold faster than the planet he inhabits.
The hydrogen bomb appears on the public horizon as a probably attainable goal. Its accelerated development has been solemnly proclaimed by the President. If successful, radioactive poisoning of the atmosphere and hence annihilation of any life on Earth has been brought within the range of technical possibilities. The ghost-like character of this development lies in its appearance.
Over a 5-year period, beginning in 1949, the FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, began to assemble a massive Einstein file. But the government did not go so far as to call him to testify. During the McCarthy hearings, Einstein urged passive resistance. He advised against pleading the Fifth Amendment, which protects against self-incrimination, but rather the First, which protects freedom of speech. His friend Oppenheimer, accused of un-American communist sympathies, did not take Einstein's advice.
He was somewhat out of tune with the spirit of the times. Let us not forget that the late 1940s, especially the 1950s, this was an age in which America didn't distinguish itself in terms of liberal democracy. It was the age of McCarthyism, of suspicion. The Rosenberg case, the persecution of Oppenheimer in the scientific field. It was not the atmosphere of freedom that should have existed in America. He didn't see America with its most attractive face, and I didn't feel that his union with the United States was a great success.
No. I do not permit anything. Would you have anything to say about Dr. Oppenheimer's present status? I have already said. No.
Einstein withdrew into his work and from the public eye. He refused all public appearances and requests for his time, making exceptions only for a few causes, the refugees from Europe and for Israel.
There were many contradictions in his life and in his personality. He was attached to Zionism. This surprised me a bit because, in general, he disapproved of nationalism, but he approved of Zionism. And he managed to reconcile that contradiction by depicting Zionism in a rather rhapsodical and romantic mood, much more in a spiritual than in a political context. He was moved by the idea that the Jewish people would become reunited with the conditions of its old glory and creativity and establish a sort of cultural and spiritual center in Palestine, but always with the condition that Zionism must understand its duty to come to terms with its Arab environment and must not enter the land of Israel in a kind of colonial, assertive mood.
Einstein wrote, "If we don't find a way of honest cooperation and dealings with the Arabs, we have not learned anything during our 2,000 years of suffering and deserve any fate that will hit us."
The first president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann, died in November 1952. And when a successor was discussed, Ben-Gurion had the extraordinarily audacious idea of offering the presidency to Einstein. Before I could even make contact with him, the telephone rang, and he himself was on the line in an almost hysterically panic-stricken mood, saying, will I please get this idea off the agenda? He said, I'm implacably and unreservedly opposed to it. I will not do it. But can't you do something to get all these newspaper people away?
Prime Minister Ben-Gurion of Israel arrives at Princeton, New Jersey to call on Dr. Albert Einstein, one of the world's greatest scientists, the father of relativity and the man whose physics formula led the way to the atomic explosion, plays host to the leader who played a great part in the creation of the Israeli nation.
They're calling me up. They're coming to the house. Please finish this matter now, once and for all.
A meeting to remember.
And he added this phrase, I do know something about nature. I know nothing about humankind. And anyway, I wouldn't sign anything that I didn't believe. Nevertheless, I felt that he was flattered and pleased by the idea that his name had arisen in that context. And when one spoke to him, as I did, of him as the greatest living Jew, I must say he didn't seem to reject that appellation with any kind of indignation.
Einstein continued his work on a unified field theory, though his health had been failing for several years. His first wife, Mileva, and his lifelong friend, Michael Besso, had recently died. But it was the death of his sister Maya that left him feeling strangely deserted. She was most like him in temperament, and he had always been close to her.
And you see, Margaret loved Maya so much, and it was terrible for Margaret when Maya died. And this story was told to me by Margaret, and she told it to me more than once. And she said they were sitting on the porch overlooking that sweet old garden. And Margaret was crying. And the professor said, ach, schau, Margot, schau ein bisschen hinein in die Natur und dann wirst du alles besser verstehen. Say, Margot, look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better.
As I grow older, the identification with the here and now is slowly lost. One feels dissolved and merged into nature. It makes me feel happy. The greatest experience we can have is the mysterious.
The scientist comes at the end of his inquiry against a stone wall, against a mystery that transcends understanding. He stands in reverence before the spectacle of nature, with its order, with its system, with its coherence, and must reach the conclusion that there is some directing, controlling power which prevents this planet from being smashed into fragments. If people want to call that God, let them call that God. But he even makes a statement to the effect that the religious idea was not one that he can dismiss, because he himself has found that there is a realm beyond which human understanding stands impotent and helpless.
He had an aneurysm in the aorta, which was very dangerous. He would have occasional pains in those last 6 years of his life. I never talked with Einstein about death. I never asked him, are you afraid or not afraid of death? It is a sense one has about a person. This lack of fear of time, this lack of concern of how long will it take before I will reach my goal. That, I think, translated itself ultimately in a lack of fear of death. And when, at the very end, the last week, when they said to him, we could try to operate you as a last resort. He said, no, he didn't want to be operated on. He says, I want to go when I'm ready, and I will do it in an elegant way.
Our situation on this earth seems strange. Every one of us appears here, involuntarily and uninvited, for a short stay, without knowing why.
To learn more about Albert Einstein, visit pbs.org.